Tucked in a little corner off Obie Riley Road is Sawyer Park, named after Robert Bob Sawyer.
Who?
Bob Sawyer was born into privilege on the East Coast in the late 1800s. He graduated Harvard Law, and he started a successful practice.
Until he makes a pretty dramatic change in his life, and in 1910 closes the law firm and comes west. In 1912, he arrives in Bend.
Now, Bob was a big-time lawyer back home, but in Bend, he just slings lumber like everyone else.
So this is the place that Robert Sawyer comes to and gets a job as a lumber piler at the Bend Lumber Company, right? So Boston lawyer, Harvard educated, all of a sudden is stacking lumber in Bend, Oregon.
Now, George Putnam, who was a fellow Harvard grad, owned the Bend Bullet. So one day, Bob just decided to start sending him some unsolicited reviews of things happening around town one day. And then again, and again, and yet again. And
eventually, by 1913, George, hires him onto the paper. So he's gone from lumber piler to a journalist with Bend Bulletin under George Palmer Putnam. And then in 1917, he sells the paper. So by 1917, Sawyer is the owner and editor of the Bend Bulletin, a position he will hold clear until 1953 when he sells it to Bob Chandler.
Bob's life began to turn towards politics, and through his efforts, a new county called Deschutes was born.
He's very involved in that election process and that political process of advocating for we need to be our own county. In 1920, he's elected Deschutes County Judge, which is the equivalent now of our county commissioners, which he serves from 1920 to 1927. From 1927 to 1930, he very importantly is on the Oregon Highway Commission.
The Cascade Lakes Highway that we all enjoy was one of his pet projects, and Bob spearheaded the efforts to save Wickiup Dam and Crane Prairie to preserve irrigation in Central Oregon.
And that project is an example of one that completely happened because of the political influence of Robert Sawyer, that he was in the room where decisions were being made to make sure that project came to fruition.
Now, when it came to political party affiliation, Bob was a staunch grand old party man.
And he was very influential in the Republican Party, tended to be very conservative in his viewpoints, and was often seen as the next Republican candidate for governor, but never ran. And he was also a conservationist. This is a time period where conservation and irrigation were all seen kind of hand in hand and not necessarily in opposition to one another. So state park preservation was also among the things that he was known for. So it's very appropriate that we honored him in 1980 with, naming Sawyer Park after him. Nothing more appropriate than having a park as his namesake.
Okay, nobody can argue that moving out west was a really good move for Bob, but if you don't mind a little bit of scandal, have you ever wondered why a successful lawyer on the East Coast would suddenly just close up shop and move out west?
It's because he and the wife of his law firm partner were having an affair. He was married, he had 3 children. She was married to his law partner and had 2 children. And it was a rather scandalous affair at the time in Boston. They ran away west, which sometimes happened on the frontier. The whole notion of, you could go out west and start over was exactly what Bob Sawyer and his second wife did. They came out west and had a different life in Bend, and that was the skeleton in the closet that would have been much more prevalent a story had he tried to escalate his political career.
So the man that Oregon Governor Sprague called the citizen of the half-century had a hidden secret.
But before you go judging Bob too quickly, he did marry that woman.
And he and Mary Sawyer were married until death did they part.
So let's just call it second time's a charm, shall we?
For Central Oregon Daily News, I'm Scott Elmas.